everybody. Good evening. I think we're ready to start. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Zozette Gier, and I'm the Manager of Content Ops and Production for Journalism at Detroit PBS. I also lead our AAPI advisory group at the station, and I have the privilege of also being on the board of the Asian American Journalists Association Michigan chapter. So on behalf of Detroit PBS and AAJA Michigan, I am very thrilled to welcome you all to tonight's screening of Rea Tajiri's film, Wisdom Gone Wild. And I hope that you can all stick around for the panel discussion, which will be moderated by my colleague, Detroit PBS, Bill Kubota. If you have made films or have any interest in that, you know that making films is not a solo act. It takes a lot of collaboration, and so does putting together an event like this. So I have some thank yous to deliver. I definitely want to take a little time to thank our partners, our API advisory group for one, the Michigan Theater, it's a beautiful space, right? And the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation, as well as POV. We're also very grateful to all of the community organizations that have set up resource tables out in the lobby, and I hope you had time to check them out before sitting down. And you'll also have some time after the panel discussion wraps up to stop by on the way out before you go home. I also want to mention that we wouldn't be able to do this without the following supporters for Detroit PBS's Caregiving Storytelling Initiative. It's really something that we've taken on as a station since last summer. And so I want to thank the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, Impart Alliance, Michigan Health Endowment Fund, and ARP Michigan. I also want to give a shout out to my Detroit PBS colleagues. Some of them are in the control room upstairs. You might have seen them in the lobby, and we've been working very hard for the past few months to really put this event together. So, and I also want to thank you. Thank you for coming here on a Tuesday. And I know it's a little warmer. It's a tropical, probably 39 degrees tonight. So we're very fortunate, right? But yeah, give yourselves a hand, please. Before we get started, I do want to introduce the filmmaker, Rea Tajiri, because she's here tonight. Yeah, give it up for Rea, yeah. And before she comes up, she's going to introduce her film. I just want to share a little background on her. So, Rea Tajiri is a critically acclaimed documentary filmmaker, interdisciplinary artist based in Philadelphia, and her career spans over 35 years. In her works, we see how the past echoes through the present. Her work explores forgotten histories, multi-generational memory, landscape, and the lives of Nikkei. She is highly acclaimed. Her most recent accolade is that she was named a 2025 Guggenheim Fellow. Yeah, yes. And she is a professor in the Film Media Arts Department at Temple University, where she teaches documentary filmmakers. So she's kind of raising up this next generation of filmmakers. Personally, what I love about documentary is that it invites us to experience someone else's life. And in Wisdom Gone Wild, we were invited to enter the world of Rea's mother, Rose. I first saw this film in 2023, and since then, it's just always stuck with me. It's just one of those films. And I think a big reason why that is because it defies cliche about what a documentary about living with dementia could be. And instead of focusing solely on loss and erosion of self, I think the film shows us that there are things that can still be found, like connection, that transformation can still occur, and that there's more that we can learn about the people that we love, even when memories may fail, when they may fall away. But I'll let her say more. Here, introduce her film. Please welcome Rea Tajiri.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to, and very honored to be invited. And thank you so much, Zozette and Bill and the panelists and the team that put together this screening this evening. It took a lot of work. I'm thrilled to actually come to Detroit and to have such a robust audience to talk about caregiving, something that was part of my life for 16 years. I took care of my mother. You'll see on screen. I recently took care of my brother last year, who passed away from cancer. And most recently, very unexpectedly, one of my closest friends had a terrible accident, so I was very involved, and I'm still involved with her care. And I guess what comes out of this, and we can talk about this after the film, but just thinking about care and caregiving in our lives, and how, what this means, how to support it. It seems that it's becoming part of everybody's life, and even my students who who are in their 20s, we talk about this, and I find that this new generation is very interested in thinking a lot. So how do we normalize caregiving for older adults, and having this in our lives? A little bit about the film. I won't get too much into it, but just to say the film is more poetic. It isn't a straightforward documentary where people sit down and, there's a camera and they're being asked questions. It's part observational, it's part, dare I say, experimental, but think of it as a poet, like reading a poem. When we read prose, we have certain expectations about how information is delivered, but when we're in poetry, it stirs up different things, associations, memory, and emotion. And so in the film, I tried to tap into the emotions that transpire when we are with somebody that we've known all our lives, and they are going through some changes, and the memories, and this notion of time travel, which is what I named my mother's tendency to go backwards and forwards in time. Sometimes she was back in her childhood in the 1920s. Sometimes she was during the war, World War II in the 40s. Sometimes she was in Chicago in the 60s, and then sometimes she was just very present with me. So that's kind of, you'll see in the film. Again, it's not a necessarily linear form, but just ride with it, and I think it will fulfill some kind of something interesting will open up for you. So, and stay for the Q&A afterwards if you can. Thank you very much.
I'm Bill Kubota. I'm a producer with Detroit PBS, work with Zozette, and I'm also on the board of the Asian American Journalists Association of Michigan, which is happy to be here too. But we want to bring up our panel to talk about such things, like our filmmaker, Professor Tajiri. Come on up. Peggy Du with the Association of Chinese Americans. Dr. Tanav Popli, are you over here? Okay, come on up. And Shaista Kazmi. There you are. She's with Sukoon Care and founder of Apnagar Home Care. Let's all sit down and chat a little bit. You can get your microphone. I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is Rea talking about this film, making the film, how it came about, probably a while ago. How did this all get started?
As I said, I was a caregiver for my mom, and this was going back to actually ancient history, 1997. I was on the eve of a really nice success. I was going to go to the Venice Film Festival, And my mom and I had a discussion on one day. She was going to help me out, a poor filmmaker, couldn't afford. She was going to put it on her credit card so I could fly out to the Venice Film Festival. And then she said, well, we'll discuss it more tomorrow. I called her the next day, and suddenly she didn't recognize my voice, and she had no recollection of the conversation. So I knew something was wrong. And anyway, we worked out the details. I went, but the whole time I was there, I knew something was wrong, and that was the first indication. Anyways, fast forward over, the next 2 to 3 years, she developed, and then she finally was diagnosed with dementia, and I was flying back and forth a lot. And it was pretty overwhelming. I was lucky. I got a really good gerontologist who you saw on the film. He's like, I think, pretty well known in the field. He's probably retired by now. And in the beginning, my friends would say, oh, you should really make a movie out of this. And I really didn't want to, because I thought, well, this is so personal. I wasn't ready, I wasn't ready to do that. But then, as years went by, I would take photos. I would have little video clips on my phone. I was kind of, showing things to family members who wanted to kind of update. So I developed this archive of really, like a lot of little clips here and there. And then I started to realize, like, there really isn't anything out there that really shows what it's like to be a caregiver. And there's nothing that I really relate to in terms of the media or the depictions or the conversations around dementia. A lot of it was around tragedy. And, of course, there's loss in this process. And, of course, there's hardship. But there's also other aspects to this. It's a very, for lack of a better word, I hate this word, but sometimes I'll have to use it, like humanizing, right? It's like something that really puts us in touch with the cycles of life, loss, aging, but also connection, and really starting to come to terms with what your parent or your loved one has been, what they've been throughout the course of their life. And I wanted to, try to encapsulate some of these things, these experiences that I was witnessing. I wanted to find a way so that people wouldn't necessarily be like instantly like, oh my God, that's so awful. That must just be so hard. And I kind of got tired of that, getting that response from people. I just wanted to say, no, it's part of life, actually. This is part of aging. Aging is part of life. Change is part of life. We don't like it because I think in a way we've kind of, as a society, we kind of got like this idea that like, well, you get to be a certain age and you disappear, you're living somewhere else. And I was just, that there's something wrong with this. So that's kind of, how it came about.
Well, I'm interested in the three of you up here watching this, what you thought. Anybody? Just start Peggy, I think.
Okay, so I actually have different feelings when I watch it the second time. So I think it's a very gentle and honest way to approach caregiving. Mm-hmm. It's just daily life. Sometimes we feel it's repetitive and we might get bored, but just it's real life. And I really appreciate the movie, like documentary, bring something used to be invisible to visible. So just like everybody's gonna have an aging, but I see Rose, you really enter her inner world and respect her. So she keep her personality, identity, and she's dignity. So I really love the movie. Thank you.
Yeah, so when I saw it for the first time and then seeing it again, I think I was also struck by the idea that you presented of change being part of life. And I think that's something that I see a lot of my patients and their families struggle with, is they're holding on to this idea that people stay the same. And that's, if we're talking even outside of dementia, other medical diseases, other things in our life, none of us stay the same. And I think Rose's story was really interesting because of some changes that were forced upon her. And I think the thing that really stuck out in my mind was that image of, well, this was her name, and then this was her name, and then this was her name, and this was the name that she gave herself as she was becoming this new person. And so, you know, this scene of her talking about you have to learn about yourself, right? And that has really stuck with me. And this idea of change being a process that we can't escape, but we can learn how to kind of deal with and manage, and it's part of what we try and help people do. But it's not, doesn't necessarily mean it's an easy thing, as I'm sure many of us know.
For me, it was very raw and very unapologetic view on caregiving, not only from your aspect, but from your mom's aspect as well. Just even something so simple as you walking into the room and opening the blinds in the morning. For me, that was my routine with my father, was just walking in, opening those blinds. And then just the chair. It's a lift assist chair, which my dad had. My dad's was maroon, but just seeing that brought me back all to those days of caregiving for him, the years that, you know, he was, you know, bedbound. And again, just offering that type of dignity to your mom was just beautiful.
It is interesting. There's all those visual signs of, I think a lot of us have gone through that dealing with our parents or the age that are in our families and friends. But what about that? Was that just you were looking for those visual cues, or it was just really following your mother along and those kind of show up? But I just wonder, how did you think she felt about being documented? There were times where she was kind of a little put off.
Yeah, it's complicated because, you know, again, I was filming over a long period of time, but then really concentrating on maybe the last 2 years of her life, right? But I think I knew it was delicate. Like, my apprehension at first in the very beginning was like, no, this is private. But then I could tell also that there would be a value to other people. So I had to kind of negotiate, you know, the ethics of, well, what were my ground rules? What would I, you know, and so my ground rules, well, I knew my mother well enough to know what she wouldn't like. And so, you know, okay, so, you know, avoiding certain kinds of filming situations, maybe like, you know, something like bathing, obviously. And I tried to get the routines of her life, but there was one routine while she would have a shower. So I remember I had this one shot, we eventually took it out, but it was a pretty funny shot of like the outside of I was staged outside the bathroom door with the curtain closed, but you could hear her conversation with her caregiver, which was pretty funny actually, because she would say, no, oh, okay, all right, fine. You know, it was like this back and forth. So that was one thing. The kicking and the punching at the doctor's office, that was in a phase where I had heard, I don't know if there's any filmmakers in the audience, but Kirsten Johnson, very famous documentary cinematographer, she made camera person, but she was describing how when she worked for Michael Moore would just say, you know, just, okay, you know, they were in a car arriving at a scene. He'd say, just start the camera now and don't stop. And you just keep going no matter what. We'll decide later if it's too much to put in the film. And so I was in that mindset. So you know, my mom started, well, this one thing where she was kicking me, and then the other scene with the, you know, difficult scene to watch, but, you know, she was punching, and I kept filming during that. And then I thought later, I won't use that. But as we were making the film, I didn't want it to be the Pollyanna version of, you know, Dementia Care 101, and nothing bad ever happens. You know, she's always joyful and happy, and it's all sweet and light. And we know that that's, you know, within the span of an hour, someone could have like 3 major different, you know, emotions. And I wanted to show like that's kind of, you know, what happens sometimes. And I didn't want to back off. So, you know, I kind of went ahead and decided to put those. We had a long conversation in the edit room about that. And the visual cues, I mean, we were lucky with the museum with the yellow streamers. That was kind of early. That was actually, I had hired a crew for the first time. I'd been shooting by myself. I hired a crew, and it was during those 3 days that we went to the museum, we got those shots, and they were so amazing. when I went to look at them, I said, oh, okay, well, I think we have a film, because one of the big things about that we found worked for my mom was bringing her to art museums, because art has a way of engaging and stimulating people with dementia, and they really start to perk up in the same way that music does. You've probably heard this if you've taken care of someone with dementia, that music is a huge stimulus, especially music from, their youth, their generation. It really kind of awakens them. And so, it was my idea to go to the art museum. Let's see what happens. And then she kind of had this really gorgeous and like wonderful moment when we kind of wheeled into that yellow installation. It was like, ooh, she came to life, and children came up to her, and she was just really alive. So actually, based off of that, we decided, okay, we have a film. How can we expand on this? How can we build off of this? So, and the scene with, you were talking about with the blinds, that's actually after my mom had died. It was her room. It was empty. There was nothing in the room. And there's some other subsequent shots where the room is being emptied out. And I shot those after she died. It was kind of emotional. But I was, doing what I always did, open the blinds, sit in the chair. Only, I was writing in my little journal. I had set up the tripod on the camera on the tripod, and was filming just what it was like to be in the empty room after all those years. Yeah.
When we were talking a little bit earlier before the film, we were saying, caregiving, is kind of part of our culture as Asian Americans. And, sometimes I think about, well, maybe, at least with my family, but I'm kind of convinced it is. And Shaista, you were talking a little bit about that. We all were, but talk about that a little bit.
I think one of the things that, as my journey as a caregiver evolved, and what I had seen was that, especially within my own community, it was all laid on the, eldest daughter, especially, although I have a brother who was 4 years younger, it was all going to be on me. And for me, it was just a perfect storm of things that happened. First, my father was diagnosed with a debilitating neurological condition. And at the same time, my mother-in-law came to live with me from India. And it was just these challenges that I had to face day to day, and contacting local senior care companies to help with the day-to-day activities was not only something that was so foreign to them, but it was very difficult for me as well. I had to contact, I contacted another local group, and they were like, well, why don't you contact your local mosque or your, temple or your gurdwara? And I was like, well, I did. That's why I'm coming to you to ask for a resource. And they had nothing. And it wasn't until, to be honest, my best friend who's sitting here in the audience, it was somebody in her community who was looking for work, and by chance was a CNA who I was able to place with my mother-in-law, so that woman and her spoke the same language. She could cook the same similar foods for her, and she was able to fit the role that I could not, as I was trying to balance both households and 3 small children. But again, it usually falls on, especially within our culture, it's the, eldest daughter.
So it's something I was thinking about a lot, how dementia culturally fits within Asian American communities, or kind of in Asian cultural contexts. And it's always tough to say, right? Because it's not a monoculture. There's all different types of people and cultures and things. But my experience, and I think, Shaista's experience speaks to that too, is it tends to be limited to family, right? And particularly on the oldest, especially oldest daughter or daughter-in-law. And I think one of the things that, especially in the kind of day and age we live in, where family's not all together, they might be farther apart, is that network sometimes needs to be broader or larger. And I think about potentially the stigma that might also go along with having problems with behavior or thinking skills or memory skills, and how that might also be a part of some of our cultural contexts, and that disconnect there of saying, well, it's in our culture to take care of our elders and to look out for family, but maybe not necessarily to involve other people in your community. And I think that's something that, that I know I think about a lot in my practice, but especially in this day and age, is something that we should be maybe hoping to change a little bit.
Yeah, I think there are many stigmas in the API communities, like Rose, like she refused to take so many medicines, and we says vitamins, and I think people just don't want to go to doctor. So, and also all the caregiving happens mostly very quietly at home, and the family caregiver wouldn't like go outside to seek supports, even though they have maybe challenging balancing their family and work. I think it's not an option or choice. It's responsibilities to taking care of the elderly in the family. And therefore, we do see like ACA's daily work. We serve lots of immigrants families, Asian families, but we do see their big burden, like due to the cultural barrier, language barrier. They kind of feel the resource available is not accessible. It's kind of gap. So I think it's challenge for them, just don't know where to seek for help. And so I think based on a lot of things ACA did, we're trying to help create things like it's not one person's responsibility or just the sister, and it could be teamwork, like it could be efforts from the whole community, so that we have more resources putting together for those caregivers and those who needs to be taken care of.
Shaista, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about what you've done with your organization, and how that came about and where it's going.
So I started this company in 2014 when my father was diagnosed with a debilitating neurological condition. At the same time, as I said, my mother-in-law had come to live with me from India. My husband decided right at that time that he had to go and do a fellowship in critical care. So, to balance both households and 3 small children, he was like, why don't you contact one of these, other, local senior care companies, and they'll help, with me. And I did. And unfortunately, they just could not meet those unique challenges that she was facing. Language, of course, the food was one of the biggest things, language and food. And so, and with my parents, language was not an issue. They had immigrated here in 1973, 74, but the cultural nuances were far greater. So in 2014, I quit my job as a clinical research coordinator at Providence Park in neurological sciences, and I started this company not having a business background whatsoever. But just knowing that I could not be the only person in this situation. There had to be others. And the other thing that I had to do was, where would I find these individuals? I wanted to make sure that I did exactly opposite of what those other companies, the caregivers that were being brought into my home. Those caregivers, yes, were personal attendants, but they had no clinical training at all. So one of the things that I wanted to do was make sure that the caregivers were certified nursing assistant or home health aides, so that there were skilled workers. And what we did is that we recruited some women, especially from Hamtramck, paid for their training, and actually had them stay on for 2 or 3 years. So that's where we were able to get culturally similar caregivers. 10 years later, I was acquired actually by one of my clients' son. They love the company. They love the idea of the company. They're, successful dermatologists. They have their own clinics, but they believed in the mission of the company, which was to allow our loved ones to age in place with dignity and respect, to offer quality care at affordable prices. That's one of the issues that the company that I started had faced, because I was offering the services at such a low price that it was extremely difficult to, sustain it. But thank God, somebody came in, stepped in, And I was acquired 2 years ago. I'm still on as patient care coordinator. But that is where the company started, and that's where the company is going. And as the population is aging, especially the Asian community and the Arab American community, we're seeing that, of course, services are more in demand.
Are we seeing more, culturally specific companies along your lines? I'm under the impression that's not that much of that going on.
No, we were the first agency here in the state of Michigan and still in others. There's one out in New York that's catering to the Russian community, the elderly Russian community. But the idea for Upnagar, now Sukoon Care, is to be kind of an umbrella for all elderly ethnic minorities. We want everybody to come here to get the information that is needed to care for their loved one, to allow them to age in place with dignity and respect. But yes, we are the only agency at this point in time. We have calls from, other, people in other states, but unfortunately we're not there yet. We hope to be. But what we do offer those individuals is if we can send referrals for live-in caregivers. Those caregivers can live in with your parents, and that allows them also, the freedom to stay in place.
Dr. Popli, I'm wondering, what do you see for opportunities with more of this kind of these operations like this, more services like this?
Yeah, apart from the kind of cultural consciousness of helping someone feel comfortable and safe and recognized and respected in their home, there's kind of just a broader deficit of caregiving services, which presents a lot of hard decisions. And it's hard to point to one thing and say, well, this is why we struggle with this as a modern community. But there are a lot of things we can point to and say that. It becomes, I think many decision points that we deal with in the office, and I'd be curious to hear what our panelists think about this too, is, for people whose goal it is to stay at home, I think these are great opportunities, particularly within ethnic communities or Asian American communities where there are some of these extra barriers to the kind of typical things that we see. But there in many cases comes a time when we have to make a decision about, is staying at home not the most appropriate thing for them on a medical sense, a safety sense, lots of other kind of decisions. And that's always a really tough discussion that we have in the clinic. And obviously in the film, we can see some of the ramifications of that decision and how it was affecting Rose. But, I think more access is always better. Access to things that are going to help people feel respected and comfortable are always going to be better. And there's obviously a gap there, as Peggy was saying, that we can go. But that decision can be really difficult for many people, and it's very nuanced.
You going to say something? Not necessarily.
Well, actually, I was just going to mention the guide that you did with your organization, the kind of caregiver's guide. Maybe you want to say something, whether you had some examples sitting on the table.
Okay, thank you, Rea. So I think I had same issue with Shaista when I figured out there's no Mandarin or Cantonese speaking caregiver in the state's healthcare system. So we said we probably need to find someone and develop some resource for the family caregivers. And so I think there are two parts. And one part is about the professional skills. Because none of us are like a certified nursing, so we don't know how to take care of a person center, right? It's not so easy even for taking a shower, cook for them the ingredients. So that's one part how we want to develop to cope the family caregiver with some professional skills. And secondly, there's a cultural part because we wanted to introduce this to I say like a local community caregivers who has the skills already, but they do not lack of some like a cultural background or understanding of how to take care of Asian American care recipient. So that's the reason why we want to develop this training. But when we reach out to a lot of home care agencies, I would say like over 10, and they kind of shocked, say, we don't have such training. So if you know someone who can speak Mandarin, introduce to my agency. I can assign them a client the next day. So I was really shocked because I think, they need to have training before they can send people to work. And I hope I can get some training from them so that I can teach back to our community member in language they understand. So then very luckily, we were able to collaborate with local college and some other agencies. So we spent around 2 to 3 years to start from scratch and develop this caregiver training guide. And especially there's some equipment for the dementia taking care. I think it's especially difficult and challenge because what Rea did to Rose, she's not fixing her problem. She's entering her world, continue developing the connections and new relationships. So I think we're very proud of this curriculum, and we're trying to kind of promote it to more of the community members. So no matter you are English speaking and trying to understand more about the Asian Americans care recipients, or you are just a family caregiver and trying to learn some basic skills. So when you are taking care of your family members, it's not like what I want to offer. It's about what they want to receive. So I think it's a really great opportunity, especially even for some younger people, when we think it's not only about multi-generations, not only the daughter or sons, might be some grandchildren age. There was one day we're going to become a team to take care of the families.
I think we were talking a little bit or hearing about the idea that, this is kind of part of everybody's life in some way, caregiving. And we were talking a little bit earlier amongst ourselves about maybe some things that are going on in other places that maybe we need to be more exposed to. One of the things that came up was talking about hospital at home and things like that. But what have we heard? It's anecdotal, but if you haven't, I haven't heard about it too much, so maybe some of the folks here haven't either.
With regard to hospital at home sort of situation, yeah. So I think within the medical field, within neurology and dementia care, there is a bigger push to try to meet people where they are, right? To help them meet their goals and discuss with patients and their families kind of what are things that are important to them and how do we help them approach that. And the work that my co-panelists are doing in terms of finding those resources, finding those gaps is really, really important. It's really exciting to hear about. With things like hospital at home, it's, when we're making decisions about people who have complex medical care needs, that, I was talking about the decision of when do we decide that they need to switch residences? And a lot of times that might be driven by other medical factors. But some of these programs that are, I'd say they're still not super widespread in many areas, but can try to bring that sort of care into the home so we're not disrupting those goals or that kind of quality of life for those people as much as possible. And that's obviously dependent on what kinds of things they value and their family values and what the availability is of those resources. So, I do like that there's a bigger push for that. I think access still becomes a major issue like we've been discussing in terms of things that are relevant and appropriate.
Shaista, we were talking about a little bit, I think, or Peggy, one of you, we were talking about things going on in places like China that maybe want to open our eyes a little bit more to.
Yeah, in Shanghai, I believe they have these apartment complexes with seniors, and because it's such a technology-driven city, and especially the apartments where literally, a doctor can be called in at a push of a button, or if the apartment can actually detect the fall and alert whomever they have on their list of individuals to contact. But these are type of, scenarios that we have yet to introduce here. But like I said, with my father, he was very adamant to age at his home. He said, I'm going to live and die here. And that was it. So we had to do whatever we could to accommodate him. For his home care, his physician would come to the home, the podiatrist would come to the home. The minute we would detect a cough, chest x-ray was sent to the home. It was a mobile chest x-ray. The blood draw was at home. So even something that small was, big for him because he wouldn't have to leave, and he was able to access all of that in the home. But again, he had Medicare and he had great supplemental insurance. Not everybody has access to that.
That's kind of what I wanted to hear. I wanted you all to hear that. Maybe y'all knew it already, but I think it's time now to get some questions from the audience out here. There's a microphone over here if you want to come over here and speak into that so we can hear you on the stream over there.
Or maybe
we can run a mic out. I don't know if we can
go
do
ahead
that.
and ask a question from where you are. We can't get to you.
It's coming.
Hi, this is for Rea Tajiri. I have one comment, a statement about the film, and also I have a question for you. I'm a retired art teacher, but what I really appreciated about your film was that it was really quite a learning experience as you were making the documentary. And what I loved about it was that you let the film go the direction it needed to go. You followed the film the way that it naturally would go. So my question to you is, when you're teaching to your class, do you show them this film? And if so, at what point? I know that most documentaries are very structural. People know exactly what they want to cover and then they do it. I just really appreciated the whole process that you went through.
It's funny. I actually taught the film as I was making it sometimes. So I would show cuts and I would describe the process. I got criticized for this by my colleagues for trying to indoctrinate people to making films just like I did, so, which was kind of weird. But anyway, I started to feel self-conscious about it. And also it's kind of tough. Sometimes there's real expectations among students about certain aspects of documentary. So I kind of have, we're kind of developing a different curriculum right now. But there's some sort of basic storytelling skills that sort of come first, and then in the advanced classes, if they stick through that, I kind of open it up to what I call non-traditional storytelling, which kind of honors a lot of different approaches. And like you said, it's working a lot with the discoveries that you make, and that, there's certain kinds of documentaries where it's scripted, and that's appropriate for certain kinds of information that you need to get out. There's other kinds of stories where it can be a little bit more freeform, and maybe it looks a little bit freeform, but it actually is highly constructed in the edit room. There's a lot of editing involved in this film, but the great part of it is it looks kind of effortless, but in fact, there's a lot to do that. But anyway, it's a compliment. Thank you. So thank you very much.
Not a question, but rather sort of an observation. I was very touched by the sort of quiet moments of joy in your film. And I think both caregivers and family forget that that's not only possible, it's an everyday occurrence.
Yes. Thank you. That's also a very high compliment. And that was probably one of the goals of the film, just to remember the everyday, right? The moments that we live through, it's really hard to capture that, and it's really hard to sort of validate it, cinematically. How do you show that, sometimes it's just like, there's a lot of things happening and then there's just that
I-
pause, you know? The pause is something that also I try to work with. It's a hard thing for people to value, I think, students, but the pauses are really important in editing. The silences when you're making a film are really actually very important. They're punctuation, but they're also important to observe in life too, you know, these little, moments of stillness.
I'm curious how old your mother was in this film.
Oh, well, at the she passed away when she was 93. So those last scenes where we're talking about the end of the war, she was like 93. But you know, so the whole gamut. I mean, some of it was when she was younger, 75, 89, in different moments. Yeah.
I have an observation. I really enjoy the whole sense making of her life. Here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I appreciate that you kind of connect the dots together, like from her early stage of life. And then even though you said whenever you ask her about her, previous life, she's kind of, very vague about it, but you were able to dig out some archive photos and then connecting dots, but also to tell a story about your family. And I really enjoy all the transitions you did, like the word kind of matched the picture and then the picture lead to the next stage of her life. And I think the editing was done so beautifully and seamlessly that you can't really tell that this is actually a different stage of her life, but it's very beautifully done coherently. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
you. My editor was just so great to work with. She's really like, her name was Catherine Hollander, and she's in Berkeley, but I've consumed all her time. I'm like, nobody can touch her. I have the next project with her. No, she's really great. She deserves a lot of credit. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Rea, thank you so much for introducing us to Rose. It was such an honor and a gift, and she will live in my heart forever, and I'm sure all of us. And I had the honor to experience caregiving 30 years ago when my father died of a glioblastoma over a matter of months. And people couldn't have told me that I would go on to just feel the unimaginable gifts from the experience. And so now, in this different journey with Alzheimer's, being a caregiver in that position, I wanted to ask you, and as a musician, I loved what you did with the sound and the concept of Foley and documentary. It was so beautiful.
Thank you.
And as a piece of art, it's different than theater, so it stays as it is. So my question for you, beautiful soul Rea, with the gifts just came tumbling out of this film. For me personally, it really is profound. So you'll be walking the caregiving journey, you and Rose, I'm not gonna cry, will be walking that journey with me every step now. And our footprints, all of us here, our footprints are no longer alone. And you have changed that. So my question for you, and I call that the two rivers, the gifts and the grieving. So how has your relationship, because this film's been out for a few years and it took a while to make, how has your relationship evolved? Just like we don't stay the same with this piece of art for you, but also a big thing I learned from my father was our relationships continue after they pass. So how has your relationship with your mother continued? And what has been unique? Each time this is shown, I'm sure you experience something different. So what have you personally experienced today with us that is about this film that's new for you?
Well, thank you so much. That's such a wonderful compliment. But I will say that what's really wonderful is that Zozette brought together and I mean this sincerely, like it didn't dawn on me until I realized all these people are in the room. And, as caregivers, just to be amongst an audience of caregivers and people thinking about caregiving and people working in the field, that's really actually a big gift, right? That we can all be together and think about this, and then I'm hopefully having some impact, or we're having impact on each other and conversing, wider than just me sitting in the editing room or me alone. That's what every caregiver, every filmmaker, caregiver, hopes, right? To reach an audience. So that's a huge gift. And it is different. You know, sometimes I was saying I show this just to an art audience, and I show it just to a film audience. And there's different conversations, different things. But I just recently have been caregiving for a very close friend of mine, and you know, the conversations evolve. Like we were just talking also about, well, we know this system that we have right now is, you know, has some gaps in it. What do we imagine? What would be like an ideal, you know, we're just trying to think in a forward future kind of way. Like what would we like it to be? You know, what would we hope it could be? And maybe one of the things is just realizing that there are gifts in this experience. There are gifts in not being segregated from people who are elderly or might be sick or might have dementia. There's, you know, to be able to have, have it be visibilized, to be able to sit in a room with people and not feel uncomfortable because they have dementia or Alzheimer's. These are, you know, to really just sit with it, you know, get over the discomfort and really say, oh, wait a minute, but there's something else happening here. And this is really profound, to sit with somebody and have them go through their life, you know, remembering things that from a long ago. So yeah, maybe in a short, I better shut up, but yeah.
Room for one more.
I'm right here. Other side.
So Rea, one of the things about that, my feeling about documentaries is that they're always a challenge to convey people looking away from a social reality or stepping up. You know, it's that decision making that goes on, and I thought you did a very, you know, subtle work here to invite people to step up to this idea of elder care, and in other ways to step up to other social issues, sexism, racism, discrimination, as well. So, you know, I've seen, you know, various documentaries that, you know, are really quite strident, and then others that are subtle. You know, this is the reality, and I'm kind of curious about how you view your role as the artist.
That's a big question. Well, I teach, and yeah, sometimes, you know, I find that just, and I don't know, maybe it's just my own experience, but when I'm really strident about something, sometimes you can just, it just can really divide something and divide an audience. Sometimes, you know, there's certain things you just have to be strident about, but I don't know. I just, at different phases of making this, I would show different cuts, and I know I would be very like, and it just, I don't know, it just doesn't, I think you can be subtle, and it has a wider, you know, it's like when you drop the pebble and then there's just like these, you know, like the radiating circles that go out. And I just found that like just a little bit of subtlety can go a lot further sometimes. So, and also just not being so on the nose, but asking people to think with you as they're watching it. So you're not saying like, and then this happened, and this is what you should do. And that, you know, I didn't want to make that kind of expositional blah, 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 blah. And just leave clues and let things sit and, you know, grow on people. So I don't know. That's just my way, I guess, of doing it. And there's many different ways. And then, you know, again, it's the topic, you know, it's a subject matter. So, but thank you. These are really nice compliments. Very, very kind.
Way to show this film to people we love.
Yeah, you know, it was on POV, but I do have a distributor. The distributor does community group license. They have just like what do you call it, a tiered, so it's Good Docs is the distributor. So you can get like your library or your community, whatever to order it, or university library. I think they may do home video sales even. I'm not sure. I forgot now. My other distributor, they didn't take this film. So Good Docs, you can also, if you go to their website, there's a pull down menu. So if you might miss it and just see the highest price, but there's a pull down menu and it just says, different tiers and what they're for. You can also, if you really want to show it and you don't have the funds, I think you can write to them and say, we want to show it as a community screening or something. And yeah. So, yeah.
All right, the old clock on the wall says we're kind of done here, but let's give another hand for our filmmaker
Yeah,
panel.
thank you, the panelists, amazing. Really, thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Detroit PBS, and Zozette.
Zozette, yes.
Yes, Zozette, who is behind all of this, bringing us all together. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Brought to you in part by Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, Empart Alliance, and by